All right, everyone, let's get started. Thank you all for coming. It's actually great to see so many people, and actually, based on the registration numbers, and I think the timings, we'll probably see people start to trickle in as well over time, but it's nice to be able to spread out and relax. So welcome to the annual IPN Retreat, which has been annual but hasn't been in person for some years now. So this is the 14th IPN Retreat that we've held since 2008. And, sadly, because of the pandemic, we haven't had one since 2019 that was in person where everyone could get together. We had some nice virtual events. But to me, it's so much better when everyone can come together, talk about science, just get to know one another, and, see posters, listen to talks. Mostly it's just about networking, right? And I feel like it's something that many of you have missed out on for the last couple of years, and I'm really hoping that this event is going to jumpstart that for everybody and make sure that everybody kind of, makes friendships and starts to establish that network that's going to follow you throughout your career. So the event today is well subscribed, people coming from all different backgrounds. Of course, the majority of attendees are students, so 192 PhD students and 117 master's students have registered, but also a large number of undergraduates interested in neuroscience, as well as faculty members and postdocs and others. So thank you all for coming out. Hope that you'll have a good time. So I wanted to start out by sort of introducing some changes that have been going on in the IPN in the last few years. You've probably noticed that there's been a lot of change going on in our office, and I wanted to take the opportunity, now that so many people are here, to introduce you to the staff and there's people nodding and shaking their head in the back, but I'm gonna go ahead anyway. So one of the big changes for the office has been Suri Wang, who's joined. When you write to ipn@mcgill.ca, the email where if you have a problem or an issue, you write to that address and you get a response back. That's Suri at the other end. Is Suri here right now? She's probably working. So Suri is somebody, she'll be coming by later, and I hope you guys will get a chance to meet her. She's really great, and she's been with the team only since March. So she's learning as we go as well. So if things take a little bit longer than normal, it's in part because she's learning when you ask questions. But I assure you, she's fantastic. I really love Suri. Catherine Vanka, who many of you will know, has been with the IPN for a very long time. She's really played a large role in making the IPN what it is today. And she went on a developmental leave for 9 months in another office. She's come back with a whole new set of skills. She's the student affairs administrator. And the person with the most experience in dealing with the system. And so Catherine is somebody who, now that she's back, you'll definitely go to her with your sort of highest level, most challenging questions. Okay. The admissions portfolio is still being run by Mirko Sablich. So you're all past that part, so congratulations. And then we've got a number of other programs going on. So our collaborative China program with UASTC, the University of Electronic Science and Technology in China, which some of you may be familiar with. We're running a kind of parallel graduate program in which students in China are taking IPN courses remotely and then come to spend some time at McGill and participate in work in IPN labs. And it's a dual master's in biomedical engineering at UASTC, which is actually, it's one of the top biomedical engineering programs in China, and here at McGill, where we have obviously outstanding neuroscience. And Mengting Hu is running that program. And probably the person who deserves the most acknowledgement for today's event is Adriana Scambetera. And she always tells me that I don't pronounce her name right, but she's sitting outside manning the station, I believe, so she's not here to criticize me for pronouncing her name incorrectly. Adriana just joined August 8th, so very recently, and immediately had to hit the ground running to organize this event, the orientation, all kinds of activities. She'll be the person who's really going to restart the IPN newsletter, which hasn't really come out for a year now, and all of the other activities that we were regularly providing for students. So I'm really happy to have her. She's been great, especially helping out and making sure that the retreat came off as it did. So if you enjoy the event, if you enjoy the food, do make sure to thank her. She's outside. The other thing is that there are 2 new work-study students who are helping out in the office. Noshin Monjur, and I don't know if Noshin is here, but Israt Jan is here in the back. And they basically have 2 portfolios that they assist with, although they're kind of helping with everything in the lab. So Noshin is really assisting Adriana with projects primarily, and Israt is working with Mirko on admissions. And of course, while I'm not new to IPN, I've been associated with IPN for a very long time in different contexts. I did agree to become the new IPN director in August 24th, 2022. So again, a bit of a last minute, thank you. So as you can imagine, having the retreat imminent made that a very interesting transition. But I do want to acknowledge the work of my predecessor, Reza Farivar, who really initiated a number of bold and creative initiatives for IPN. And so I hope that people appreciate what he's been able to do. And I'm sure that he'll continue to be active in IPN. Okay, so for the schedule of events today and tomorrow, we have a lot of diverse activities planned. So of course, my opening remarks. We're really lucky to have a keynote lecture by what I thought would be speakers that would appeal to a very broad audience. So Dr. Susana Martinez-Conde and Stephen McNick, they have a lab at SUNY Downstate, and they basically come from a strong neurophysiology, psychophysics background in the visual system. And I'll introduce them when it's time for them to talk. But what's quite remarkable is that they give talks that can appeal to a very broad audience because they've appreciated the fact that we can best understand how the visual system works and how the brain works by looking at how it sometimes doesn't work the way it normally would, or the way you'd expect it to. So they've taken advantage of exploiting optical illusions and magic, sleight of hand, to help us understand what the brain is really doing. So I think that's something that can appeal to everybody. I'm really happy to have them. In fact, I understand that they were supposed to fly in, and their flight, basically they had issues with the flight, and so they drove all the way up to be with us this morning. So I'm really grateful to them for that. The first symposium is going to be chaired by Aparna Suvarthan, and it's called Bridging the Gap Between Cellular and Circuit Function. That will be followed by a box lunch. So in order to minimize any potential COVID transmission, obviously it's not possible to completely prevent any possible transmission. So please continue to wear masks, try to stay outside whenever possible. So when we have coffee breaks or lunch, I recommend that people go outside. The weather's not bad. There's a park right nearby, so take your lunch out there. Then come back for the poster sessions and just continue to mask. I'd really appreciate it, just for the sake of those people who might be concerned. But I'm not going to mandate it. It's based on your comfort level. Okay. Then after lunch at 2 o'clock, we'll have an awards ceremony. So what I'll do at that point is to acknowledge all of the many awards that IPN students have received in the past year, and it's really impressive. And then we'll give out the Anne and Richard Sievers Award and the IPN Excellence Award, which are awards that we give out annually at the retreat to the sort of senior student who has done extraordinary work and kind of needs one last year of kind of push, a little bit of extra funding to help them complete what has been already an outstanding PhD. That'll be followed by Symposium B, which is the structure, dynamics, and function of macro-scale brain networks, chaired by Bratislav Misick. And then a coffee break and the last poster session, okay? And so, after that poster session, you're free to go. And tomorrow morning, I hope you'll come back early, bright and early for our next set of talks. There'll be an initial set of talks organized by the student organizations at IPN, in particular, GSAN, BrainReach, Neurolingo, BrainInfo, and a new one called Integrate and Fire that I hope you guys will be interested in. That will be followed by the second keynote lecture by David Ragsdale. So this year, we normally have an internal keynote that we invite from among the faculty at McGill. And this year what we chose to do was to have the students nominate somebody. So we asked GSAN to run a survey, and David Ragsdale was pretty much the top choice. And he's a great speaker. I think you'll all really enjoy his talk. Then there'll be sessions about opportunities at McGill for funding, for various opportunities for research. So you'll hear about MyTax, HBHL, and the EDI committees that we've set up at IPN. Followed by a research symposium on early life adversity in humans, identifying biological mediators of increased vulnerability to mental illness, chaired by Naguib Meshawar. That, again, will be followed by a boxed lunch, poster sessions, and an open science session. So Open Science in the Making, chaired by Joe Stratton and colleagues from the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute. And then finally, Symposium D is Novel Mechanisms and Cell Models that Drive Our Understanding of Brain Disorders, again, chaired by Joe Stratton and originally organized by Thomas Durkin. And unfortunately, Thomas had to leave due to a family emergency, so Joe will be running that session. A coffee break and poster session. And then a GSAN organized career panel. So we're going to bring former IPN graduates in to talk to you about what they've experienced in their career path, choices that they've made, what they're doing now. And I hope that it'll be informative to students, especially students who are nearing the end of their training. And then, of course, at 7:30, the GSAN party at Thompson House. So I hope you'll all have a chance to celebrate Friday night. Events are over, and have fun. And that's really it. One more thing I'd like to just set up are some ground rules. Because many of the talks are going to be recorded, in order for people who are unable to attend to be able to watch them at another time point, not all of the talks, but most of them. It's necessary for people to ask questions at the microphones. So if you do have a question during one of the talks or after one of the talks, please walk up to the microphone, maybe form a line if there are multiple people, and ask your question into the microphone. That way your question will be recorded and it will be easier for the speaker to answer you directly. So that's the one thing I would request in terms of questions. So have a good time, enjoy getting to know one another, and learn about the amazing research that's going on at IPN. Have some fun. So thanks. So now I'll invite up our speakers. Coming up.
Thank you so much, Ed, for having us. It's such an honor to be here at the renaissance of your program post-pandemic. Suzanne and I were asked to speak in part, I think, because of our outreach work. And so we're going to concentrate on talking about how we talk to the public about neuroscience. And we kind of trick them into thinking about neuroscience, and we do it in a way where hopefully they come away with an accurate understanding of the brain rather than a bunch of crazy crap from the internet about why illusions mean that you're criminally insane or sexually frustrated or whatever. Okay, so let's talk about how we address illusions. We will talk very little about our own data at one point and how we can use data, use illusions to understand the brain. So we've added a few hardcore slides in there for you, but mostly we're going to talk about how different illusions can affect the way you see and perceive. Most of the work we're going to talk about is derived by the amazing illusion creators that we curate with the Best Illusion of the Year contest every year. Anybody can submit. If you make it, there's an international group of judges that take all of the dozens to hundreds of submissions every year and narrows it down to the top 10. And these judges don't rank the top 10, those that are not released, so we just then present the top 10 on YouTube. And the public around the world votes on those illusions. And then so the judges kind of curate a party, if you will. And then from the votes, there's a top 3, and those people win cash prizes of $3,000, $2,000, or $1,000. And so many of these illusions will have been developed specifically because of that contest, which is one of the reasons we did this. Interestingly, when we started this contest in 2005, we were running our own conference in Spain at the time, and we did it to kind of bring the public into the conference. And it was a really big hit. And so we've continued it thinking, well, any day now, everybody's going to run out of all the old illusions they've noticed that's sitting on the shelf. And we thought it would run for a couple years, and then everybody kind of run out of those ideas, and we will have mined it out. But that's not what's happened. What's happened is that it's actually inspired people to create and think about new illusions and how to present them to the public in 1-minute YouTube videos. And I think it's been a real, advance for the public's understanding of cognitive neuroscience. All right, so let's talk about an illusion. So this illusion is one in which you look at the center cross there. Don't take your eyes away from the cross. And we're going to show you a bunch of A-list actors, some of the most beautiful people in the world. And as you watch this, you'll see that, keeping your eyes on the crosses now, after a while, the faces go from being beautiful to being horrific monsters. Okay? Just stay fixated on the center cross, and they become caricatures of themselves. Now, if you actually look right at the faces, you'll see that they're actually still the A-list beautiful people that you know and love. But if you look back at the cross again, they become these horrible caricatures. Okay? So this is an example of a visual illusion. Now, optical illusions and visual illusions are not the same thing. Optical illusions are illusions of the physical world. They're physical illusions. Optical illusions are things like the refraction of light you might have in a glass of water. If you put a pencil in it, it looks broken at the surface because of the different refractive indices of water and air. So that would be something that happens due to the nature and the quantum mechanics of light. Okay? It's an optical illusion. A visual illusion is like this. This doesn't happen in the world. It only happens because of the way your neurons work. So if we figure out how this illusion works, then we've learned something about how the brain is actually seeing faces and how it actually sees faces over time. And we can start to investigate the actual plaster of the world that our mind builds for us, because we never actually see the world. We only see the simulation of the world that our brains actually build for us. And so now we're looking at the cracks in those plaster and what it's made out of, okay? And that's why illusions are important. Okay, because they tell us what the brain is actually doing, not what we think it should be doing if the visual system was a camera. Okay? All right, so here's another illusion. You see these lines look like they're crooked, but they're not. Okay, these lines, the blue lines are actually, this is a checkerboard. These blue lines are actually completely horizontal and parallel to each other. Okay, now I'm going to prove it to you. At the corners of these checkerboards, you'll see those little tiny diamond shapes. For some reason that nobody understands yet, so this is an open question, those diamonds cause this effect. Okay, now if that's true, then if I just blur this, at some point the blur is going to be high enough where you'll see the blue lines and the big checks, but you won't see the little diamonds, and you'll see them as parallel lines, right? Okay, let's try it. So now we're starting to blur the image a little more. It still doesn't look horizontal, and boom. Now you can see it for what it is. Because your brains can't see the diamonds, and therefore it's unable to deal with this. Now, why does this happen? Well, we don't know. It probably has something to do with the way we see intersections of lines and how they tell us about the three-dimensionality of the world. Something like that. But we don't actually know exactly how this happens, so it'd be really cool if one of you found out. I'll try and beat you to it, though. All right, so this illusion here is very interesting. So this looks like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and one is more tilted than the other. You've probably seen this one because it comes from here. This is Fred Kingdom's illusion. And if you look at this, though, you'll find that, in fact, these two images are exactly identical. Okay? So one was not leaning over more than the other. It was only in your brains. And what's interesting, it was in all of your brains in the same way. Okay? So if we take that a little farther and we look at the Oersted and Pomerantz's illusion, which is similar, you can see the two roads here are parallel to each other. And then if you show this, well, I'm sorry, those are the two ones that are parallel. I'm sorry for the confusion. Oh, wait. Oh, damn it. Which one of these is parallel with each other again? It's not a rhetorical question. It's very hard to tell. Oh, it's those two are identical. They're congruent, but you can see those two rows look parallel and identical, but they're not, okay? It only looked parallel and identical because your brain didn't see them as geometrical objects on a screen. They saw them as two roads going off into the distance. And if those were two actual roads going off in the distance, your brain would see them as two identical lanes in the three-dimensional world with a surface that you could walk on, etc. It's an incredibly important process that your brain provides to you because you couldn't have navigated yourself into this room and found a seat without it, right? Perspective isn't just for looking at Renaissance art on a canvas. It's how you see everything because your retina is a flat screen and you see everything in 3 dimensions because of it. So we need to understand how these rules work and how the brain builds it for us to understand the world around us. Okay. Here's interesting illusion. So this is by Kokichi Sugihara, okay? And he's going to show us that you can take cork and wooden balls that don't have any magnets in them, and some of them are glass actually, and if you set them on these ramps, they roll uphill and defy gravity, okay? Now you probably all know that that's not actually happening, though it looks that way. So I want you to just turn it off, okay? Just see it for what it is, which is the balls are rolling downhill, okay? In fact, I'm going to show you exactly what's happening, okay? It's at ramps going downhill, but if you look at it from a specific accidental view, your brain interprets it ambiguously as either going uphill or downhill, and it chooses uphill, okay? Because of the specific cues that your brain sees, just like those rules of perspective. Okay, so now you know what it is, okay? You're the top neuroscience students of Canada, damn it. Turn it off and just see this for what it is, which is the balls are rolling downhill. So your brains, okay, are so ingrained that you cognitively know perfectly well what you're looking at, and you cannot turn off what your brain is forcing you to see here, which is that the balls are rolling uphill, okay? That's how powerful these rules are to how you interpret things. If you tried to step on this, you'd make the same mistakes, even though you know, okay? So it's not true that knowing about illusions and how they work perfectly is going to somehow prevent you from experiencing that. That's not true. What is true is that your brain works the same way whether you cognitively know it or not, okay? So here's another illusion from Sugihara. This is one of my favorites, and when I saw this, I was just blown away. Now there is no CGI in this image. I often get that question. And this was the winner in 2016. So that's a mirror in the back, and he's just setting down 3D printed objects in front of the mirror. Now notice the object and the reflection. It is topologically impossible for that to happen, okay? Yet your brain sees it this way nevertheless. And he showed you how it works. See, right there, that's obviously very clear now how it's working. He showed it to you, and you must have a very clear idea in your mind how this is working. So it should be no problem for you to explain that now, right? This next one, totally easy to explain how that must work, right? You know, right? You know that these squircles that he printed up are actually, look one way from one view and another way from another view, okay? So what Sugihara has done here is he's taken advantage of the way we see objects from different perspectives, and he's built objects that by design, if you look at it from one angle, have a certain profile, and from another angle have a different profile. And you can take this very far. But that is how you see every object in the world. And that's how this works, okay? It truly is, shadows on the wall of the cave, okay? So let's look at this one here. This is the actual most recent first prize winner of the illusion contest, Jonathan Pritchard. And, is it Matt Pritchard? Matt Pritchard, I'm sorry. So here he's playing chess. You notice the queen is in the mirror, but it's not on the checkerboard. Again, this is a mirror, it's not CGI, and here's how he does it. He makes anamorphic camouflage so that when you look at it from a specific point of view, you cannot see that the camouflage is there because it matches the other pattern geometrically in space as well, okay? So if you look at the queen from that angle, you can't see because it's behind a wall. But that wall has just the right drawing from that specific point of view so that it looks like the ground, okay? This is one of my very favorite illusions. Okay, so I'm going to pass this off tag team to Susanna now, and she's going to tell you a little bit about magic.
Hey there. So Steve has shown us a number of different illusions, but in all of them there is a form of deception. What we are experiencing is not what's there. So the bigger question is, how and why, perhaps, does our brain deceive us? That is why we experience illusions rather than the truth. And the short answer is that we don't really know. We don't have a complete idea of all the neural mechanisms underlying all the various illusions categories that we may perceive. However, there are some general principles. So we're going to go over a few of them. First off, our brains are limited. Powerful machines as they are, we nevertheless have brains that have to have a certain size, because we all have to fit through the birth canal, so our brains have to fit in our skulls. We have, as a result, we have a limited number of brain areas, neurons, neural connections between them. And so we cannot process the vast, almost limitless amount of information that is constantly bombarding our senses. We have to pick and choose. We process a very limited portion of reality, and we simulate the rest. Most of what we perceive, most of what we experience is a simulation that our brains create based on very limited information. So we fill in blanks, and these blanks can be all the way from perceptual to highly cognitive. We also seek structure, and we will talk more about that, and we tell stories about what we experience to others as well as to our own selves. What do I mean by filling blanks? Well, the classic one is, of course, the blind spot. And I'm going to give you a way to experience your own blind spot very easily. I'm sure that you all know the blind spot is the area in your retinas where the optic nerve leaves the eye, so we don't have any photoreceptors there. Okay, we cannot process visual information. So I'm going to show you how to find it very quickly. The person in the animation is not doing it very well. My beautiful assistant will illustrate. And you can extend both arms, so elbows completely straight, locked elbows, and double loser sign. Touch both thumbs, and now close your left eye and look at the tip of your left index finger while paying attention to the right fingertip. You should see that the right finger disappears. If it doesn't, move around a little bit until you make the tip of the finger go away, and hold the position. Can you see that the tip of the finger is gone? Yeah? Okay, very good. Now, don't stop just yet. Tell me, for those of you who were able to make your fingertip disappear, can you see what's behind the finger? No? No answers? Is there a big black hole behind the finger, or you see basically the room is behind the finger? The room, yeah? So, no, not really. You don't have X-ray vision. Sorry to tell you this at this stage in your careers. But what's happening? Our visual system is, of course, taking information from the edges around this big gaping hole that we have very near the center of our vision, and using that information to fill in what should be there so that we notice no obvious gap. So this is a very smart algorithm, but it's not quite smart enough to reconstruct the actual fingertip that is, in fact, there, not being processed. All right, and you can use this trick to, decapitate people you don't like. So you're welcome. I think there was a French king who used to do that. Anyway, so we fill in blanks of all types. We also seek structure, even when there is no structure to be found. Our brains are meaning-seeking machines. We try to organize what can be very disorganized perceptual input. We see faces in clouds and all sorts of tricks that we use to make sense of reality. This is an example. This is another illusion from the contest. It was a finalist in our very first edition back in 2005. What you can see here is a grid that looks very well organized in the center, but the left and right flanks are very disorganized. I'm going to ask you now to choose one of the intersections at the very center and fix your gaze there as precisely as you can and hold it. You should see that in a matter of seconds, your visual system is going to take the information from the center and reorganize the flanks so that the whole grid is now perfectly rectilinear. Okay? This is all in your heads. The grid is still as disorganized as it ever was, but you're getting an artificially organized picture of reality which doesn't match the actual stimulus. And I mentioned that we also improved our narratives or reality. We tell our stories. We tell ourselves stories. We tell each other stories. We try to connect cause and effect. And oftentimes this connection is completely illusory. That's why a lot of magic tricks work. The magician makes a magic pass or with her hands or uses a magic wand to make a rabbit appear or disappear on stage. We connect those two actions, the magic motion and the appearance or disappearance of an object, as if one causes the other. That, of course, is illusory. But we establish these sort of connections in real life as well. And moreover, we don't even know what choices we make, or we're not aware of our own choices. And this is exemplified by this paradigm that started off with this now classical experiment from 2005 that led to this idea of choice blindness, which, as the name indicates, highlights the fact that we are blind to our own choices. So in the original experiment, the researchers had a very simple setup. They showed two pictures to participants and asked them to choose which of them was the more attractive. So participants chose one, whichever one they liked the most. Now the researchers turned both pictures upside down and asked the participants to pick the photo they just chose. What the participants didn't know was that the scientists had received training from a professional magician, so they used a sleight of hand technique to swap the choice. So when participants picked the picture they thought they had just chosen, they ended up with the opposite picture, okay? Now, more than a third of participants did not notice a swap had been made. Okay, so that's already kind of disturbing, but that was not even the most interesting part of the experiment. The interesting part came when, for those people who did not notice the swap, the researchers asked them, okay, now tell me, please, can you explain what made you choose that picture? Why did you consider that picture more attractive? Now remember, this is not the picture they chose. This is the opposite of what they chose. And you might think, okay, well, given that they did not choose that picture, they're probably just completely, they're drawing a complete blank about what made them make that choice. That was not the case at all. People, in fact, had all sorts of reasons that they provided for why they made a choice that they did not actually make. And these are some examples of the subject's comments. She's radiant. I would rather have approached her at a bar than the other one. I like earrings. That's a lie. The one that they chose has no earrings, right? She looks like an aunt of mine, I think, and she seems nicer than the other one. So very, very sophisticated explanations here. Yes, well, she looks very hot in this picture. Not everybody was very sophisticated, I must say. But you see, there's all sorts of reasons. Just a nice shape of the face and the chin. I thought she had more personality in a way. She was the most appealing to me. I don't know. The only honest subject, right? So this is very interesting, right? So I think that this reveals a lot of important aspects about human cognition. Well, first off, the fact that we often think that, or we believe that we think and then we act, and that's just not true. A lot of times we act and then we start thinking, well, why did I do that? Well, it may be because of this and that. So we don't know. And in fact, we interpret the motivation for our own actions very much from a third person sort of way, just like we oftentimes wonder about why did a person say that to me? Well, maybe they had a bad day, they didn't have coffee this morning. We do the same thing about our own actions. So that's a little bit worrisome. But I think that there's reasons for optimism as well, because sometimes we agonize about decisions. Should I pursue these graduate studies, or should I don't know, move to this town, or start this relationship, end this relationship? And we really think hard about these life decisions. But it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because whatever you end up choosing, you're going to be finding all sorts of reasons why that was absolutely the best decision that you could have made. So I think there's hope in that. And with that, I'm going to return it to Steve to talk more about magic and illusions.
Okay. So we've talked about physical illusions, like optical illusions. We've talked about sensory illusions, which happen in all the senses, but we've talked mostly about visual illusions. And now we've talked about some cognitive illusions, which are the same as sensory illusions, but they're dominated by the cognitive mechanisms of the brain. So by studying cognitive illusions, we can get at the actual mechanisms the brain's using for cognition, rather than the mechanisms that we think we should be doing, like being honest about choosing a given picture, right? Instead of just, pants on fire confabulation, okay? So let's talk a little bit how we get at those cognitive illusions in a laboratory setting in another way. So this is Apollo Robbins. He is actually a professional thief, but to be a professional thief, a stage thief, you are actually a magician, and he's perhaps the finest one in the world, as we'll show you a couple different examples. But this is him doing a famous magic trick called the French drop. Okay, so take a look. And the look. Okay, so he made that coin disappear, and that's very interesting that he was able to do that. He did a number of things there that drew your attention away from what he was actually doing and towards what he wanted you to think he was doing, when in fact he wasn't really doing that. You knew this was a magic trick. I told you it was a magic trick. I told you the name of the magic trick ahead of time, and almost all of you, I'm sure, fell for it. Okay, so you might be able to cognate where exactly that coin must be now, but you can't be sure, probably. Okay, so we started a collaboration with magicians to actually start getting at this, and it turned into real research. So while we were studying, working with these magicians, our idea was we're going to learn magic because it is the most powerful set of cognitive illusions in the world. And what's really cool about magic tricks over like illusions that are invented in science, some of which we'll show you in a little while, is that these illusions work over and over, show after show, night after night at the same theater. You can look at them often several times and it still works. Whereas most of the time in science, we pare it down to one specific effect. It works once and then you can never see that gorilla again. Okay, so or you never not see it, right? So that's the situation. So we're going to poach the magic tricks, bring them back to the lab, and bring decades off of cognitive science research and discover things earlier because of this. That was the big idea. But when we started meeting with these magicians, one of the things that happened was it turns out that they think a lot about cognitive science themselves. Some of them are fans and they read, and some of them just think about it. The magicians have been thinking about cognitive science for millennia, longer than scientists have been, for example. It's not just in the 20th century. They've been going back to Egypt, okay? So we now realized that they had their own models of what was happening. And some of these models for what they thought was happening in the brain were just laughably wrong, okay? Just put that out there. Nope. We definitely know that that process doesn't happen. Some of them were correct, like very similar approaches and conclusions that scientists have now shown are true, like spotlights of attention exist and things like that. And some of them sounded kind of like they might be right, and science doesn't know, right? So this got our ears up, okay? So this was potentially a way not only for us to just poach their techniques for our laboratories, but they actually might be able to like tell us how they may have discovered for real how things worked because it sounded and smelled good, and so maybe it's actually true and we can just test those models directly, okay? So that's why we were so excited about studying magic. So we've published a number of books and publications concerning this for the public and for scientists, and I just want to tell you a little bit about some of those things. And here's an illusion, for example, that came out of science, but that magicians now use, and you'll recognize it. Can you turn it up, please?
But with a bit of mind control, I wanted to see if I could make these people take even the most obvious things for granted.
Excuse me. Do you know how to get to Trinity Church from here?
Yeah. You see that church down there?
Yep, straight through there.
And then you keep going down.
Sorry, which way?
You see that church is down there?
Yeah.
You stay on that, which is, I believe, Broadway. And then you walk.
Okay. So raise your hand if you saw something unusual there. So about half of you, right? If you didn't see anything unusual, raise your hand. Yeah. So interestingly, the guy with the map changed, for those of you who didn't notice, completely. Different person, okay? And not only did this guy who's giving directions didn't notice, but you didn't notice, okay? Even though I just told you you're going to see an illusion and that you've seen this kind of thing before. Okay, so let's just take a look now again.
Down 2 or 3 blocks, and Trinity Church is on the right-hand side. We're walking in that direction.
Excuse me, you don't know where Trinity Church is, do you?
Might be Wall Street and Broadway.
Okay. Well, we're down here somewhere, aren't we?
Yeah, you see Trinity Church.
Oops, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. Inside the Trinity Church, right there. Yeah. If you keep going that way, you left Broadway, then you go down a couple of blocks. And,
Thanks very much.
That seemed almost too easy, so later on I see how far I can take it.
Excuse me, do you know where Trinity Church is?
It's in that direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last time I switched with someone who looked a little bit like me, but where's the fun in that?
Now, look at the woman on the left.
You know who
The woman on the left noticed.
You see where that lady's standing?
Sure.
That's the pool. No, the lady in the gray.
the other side.
Yeah, the other side of the
But you
pool.
say you don't know where it is?
Exactly what street, no, but it's in that direction.
Okay.
Yeah, okay?
Excuse me.
This is my favorite
Do you know
one
where
here.
Trinity Church is from here?
Yeah, fine. Come on, I'll take you, or you want to walk now?
I'm gonna catch some other people. Sorry, guys.
Okay, listen, once you go on Broadway,
Yes.
remember the numbers are going... Okay, what's going with another guy?
Okay. This guy, okay, he noticed something went on, and he said, the words came out of his mouth, "I thought you were another guy," okay? And what do you think he does?
Was he hit the floor or did he fall down?
Yeah.
He just continues on.
And just walk straight
That's
down.
remarkable.
His face is really brown.
That's brilliant. Thank
This
you.
could be happening to you every day.
Excuse me. Do you know where Trinity Church is? Ah, great. Where are we on here? We sort of there.
We're right here.
Right through, thank you.
Go on. We are the Brooklyn Bridge. You want to cross over there, go down Broadway, and you'll be right there. Okay, thank you.
Watch her. Here it comes. Wait a minute. All right, so we don't necessarily know what's going on around us all the time, but our brain creates a narrative of what's going on at all times, okay? And that narrative doesn't have to match reality because it's usually our assumptions are correct. We assume that if we're talking to somebody and there's a small distraction or interruption, that person doesn't completely change into another person, and that's a pretty safe bet. So you don't really need to put a lot of resources to making sure the person in front of you doesn't change into someone else a lot, okay? So we can use these types of illusions to actually investigate the mechanisms by which we maintain that continuity from second to second throughout time. Here is an illusion. I'm going to show you an illusion. Your idea is to look through the illusion, okay? Try your best, okay? In this illusion, there's going to be changes. You just have to count the changes. That's it. Just do it, okay? Prove the Canada's the best. Here we go.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
Sorry, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
That is the question. How observant were you? Okay, so for those of you who have not seen this demonstration before, call out how many changes you saw. 6? 16? 8? 2? So 2 to 16. Wow. That is terrible. Okay. All right. So it's actually 21 changes just happened, and you saw them all, okay? It was perfectly possible to see them all. I've never, even though I know there's 21, and I just sit down and I try and do that, I can't count them. Okay? It's very hard because our brain is not set up to look for changes in continuity through time. That's just not what we're for, okay? We assume that plants don't change as we're sitting there and we look one way and we come back and it's a completely different plant, okay? But let's take a look.
Action. Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the
Check out the
brass
dead
in the
guy.
master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Try not to be distracted by the dry sexual humor from Britain.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
This was actually an advertisement in Britain for looking for motorcycles while you drive. Pretty good. All right, so here's another one from last year's contest. You know the drill. Try and find changes. you're all waiting for the gorilla to jump out, aren't you? Okay. Most of the stuff in that room changed while you were looking at it, okay? So things don't just happen in cognitive illusions because your attention is misdirected in one place, okay? Or so there's overt attention where you look in the wrong place, right? There's overt illusions, I say, overt misdirection. Then there's covert misdirection where you're looking in the right place, but you're paying attention to the wrong place, okay? But what this illusion shows you is that there is a temporal component to this, that if things change very slowly, like the sun through the sky, right? You really can't see it happen. Your brain isn't set up to watch things that are that slow because you don't really care about things that are moving that slow. If they're moving fast, you want to know. If they're moving so slow that it's like watching the grass grow, you can't see it except unless you look out your window once a week, okay? So that is what this is showing, and that it's the speed at which things have to change is much less gradual than you would think. You just saw something like 100 changes, okay? So let's take a look. All of those things changed very gradually while you were watching it, but it wasn't that gradual. It was over the course of about a minute, okay? So we can use illusions like this to start setting the time limits and the speed limits of our cognitive systems. And we can find out how the neurons do that and fail, for example, to see changes based on how slow they are. Okay, so this illusion is one of my favorites too. It was in the very first illusion contest, and it's by Peter Tse at Dartmouth. And this is the very first illusion that we had where we could directly see the effects of attention on vision rather than looking at performance changes like what we've been doing so far. I've been asking you to count changes and things like that. And I've been manipulating your attention with these illusions, but basically, it's an effect of how well you perform in some task based on the attention, whereas here we can just see it directly, okay? So here, I want you to look at the green dot in the center, and I want you to pay attention to the circle in the upper right, and it'll seem brighter than the other two. Now pay attention to the circle in the upper left. It's brighter. Pay attention to the one below. Now I want you to use your own free will, if you still think you have any, and move it around, and you'll see that the circle that you're paying attention to actually gets brighter than the other two as you move your attention around by about 5% contrast, okay? So this is the first time we could psychophysically measure the effects of attention on contrast. And this illusion happened around the same time that John Reynolds in Bob Desimone's lab, first were able to measure this in a neural sense as well and draw a utility curve essentially between amount of attentional suppression and effects in a neuron and the amount of contrast change that this affects in vision, okay? And they came up with 4 to 5% in V4, okay? So, all right, so let's talk about a little bit about mechanisms of attention. So the real question is, how do all of these things we've been looking at actually happen in a bunch of bags of salt water and proteins that make a neuron and make a network in our brain, right? So we want to see how Apollo Robbins, if we're looking at him do the French drop, light goes into our eyes, it hits our retinas, it forms an image that's transduced into electrochemical signals that travel through the LGN and back to the visual cortex, and it forms a map of activity where we have to pay attention to something and we're missing something else. So this is already a clue as to what's going on. We know the visual system does this, okay? So, and what we also know is that we're paying attention to this region of the hand, okay? And we're missing where the coin actually is. So what turns out is that there's an attentional spotlight on this region that Apollo has used his eye movements and gestures and his all sorts of various magical tricks to get us to pay attention to his hand. And we've now used our own mechanisms of attention to actually focus there and suppress everything else so that we can't see in our own minds where the coin actually is. He's played mental jiu-jitsu with us, okay? We're using our own powers of attention against ourselves. And that's what magicians have learned to do. So how does this actually work? I promised I'd show you some data. So this is a paper that we did with Jose Manuel Alonso in monkeys in his lab at SUNY Optometry. And the basic idea here is we had monkeys staring at this point here, and a little cue, which is the white circle, would flash onto the screen, and the red circle would flash onto the screen, and that's where the monkey is supposed to pay attention. And the little white circle is where the receptive field happened to be in this trial. Sometimes it was outside that region, and sometimes it was inside that region. And that region coincides where a grading would show up. Okay, and there were also other gratings on the screen that the monkey in this trial wasn't paying attention to, but in other trials would be paying attention to. Okay, and then there would be a color change as the monkey's fixating here, but paying attention to where the cue was. And then when the stimulus changes color, they have to release a lever. And if they don't, then the trial's negated. We don't use that data. Okay, but if they release it on time, it means they were paying attention as they're supposed to the color change. Okay, and what we see in our data, if we look in time here, is that a half a second after the monkey starts fixating, there's a randomized period of drifting of the gratings. Okay, and the neural response in V1 would be something like this, and the stimulus is actually moving as a drifting grating for a while. And then what happens right before we turn on the cue? We take a measurement. We measure the attention for one cycle of the stimulus, and then we change the cue. So it's before the monkey has to actually react to anything, we measure what's happening in the cells. And so we have an easy task where there's a big change in color, and the attention is inside the stimulus, and we have an easy task where the attention's outside the receptive field. And we have a hard task where the attention's inside the receptive field and a hard task where it's outside. And what we found was that that in V1, there's very little change for the easy task in terms of attentional modulation, but for the hard task, there's a very large change in terms of the suppression of V1 neurons, okay? And so what we're seeing here is that at the very focus of where you pay attention, and this was a bit of a surprise, nothing happens. We kind of thought, well, when you pay attention to something, you're affecting the neurons that are being used at the attentional focus, but that's not what happens. What happens is, where you're paying attention, nothing happens. And in the surround, everything else is suppressed. Okay, so there's two ways to increase signal to noise. You can increase signal, which is what everybody thought attention was doing, okay? Or you can decrease noise, which is what the brain's actually doing. And this solves a big problem in neuroscience because it was always a mystery. How can you possibly increase signal while not increasing noise? If you put a bunch of neurotransmitters on a neuron, you're going to increase the signal, you're going to amplify, but you're also going to amplify the noise, right? So it was a big mystery how you could change the signal to noise ratio through the process of attention. And the answer is because you're suppressing noise, which is easy to do, and you're not enhancing signal, which is hard to do. Okay, so, and it's task difficulty related, which explains why previous to this study, people hadn't seen this effect in V1 before. But now that we've did it in this way where we showed easy and hard, we were able to actually determine that the attentional effects in V1 are just as strong as in higher visual areas. So the circuit for something like this looks like this. So you've got three motion-sensitive direction-selected neurons in V1. If you're paying attention to Apollo's hand, you're focusing your attention there. And that the neurons, the inhibitory neurons at that same point are suppressing the neighbors so that it suppresses your perception of where the coin actually is, which is, in this case, the other hand. Okay? So this is how magicians have been, for thousands of years, manipulating the minds of their spectators in a very neuroscience relevant way that's informative to how we think. Okay? All right, so for one last thing we want to talk about is, before we take questions, is Apollo Robbins, who's helped us so much to understand the brain. But now he's going to be in his native environment in the wild as a magician, not a magician, a pickpocket, stealing from people on inebriates, to be exact, in the streets of Las Vegas, okay? And just so you know, actually stealing from people who are drunk is harder than stealing from people who are not drunk, because if they're drunk, it's very hard to manipulate them in terms of their attention, because they can't even control their attention very well. So anyway, let's take a look at this master at work, okay?
That's a nice ring, man.
Can you turn it up, please?
Yes, it is. Doesn't really work for me either. Do you have another one? Sorry about that. Looks like the one I'm wearing, doesn't it? Yeah, you gotta hold on to that, man. Don't lose it.
Oh, yeah. This might be on the
down just a little bit lower. Hold on. No. Well, the only thing that's discovery about this is that we end up with this. Does this belong to you, man? Check it out. And you had something down here, too, didn't you? Here, let me see. We can see if we can make this go just a little bit further. It should have a little familiar ring to it. Looks just like the coin we were playing with a while ago, man. Bunch of close.
Turn my ring into 50 cents.
Well, I didn't turn your ring. I just put it in another place. Down by your pocket, there was a ring, man. Does that belong to you? You can give that back to him. Is that your ring, man?
No. You better put that on before we go home.
Yeah, that's cool. Now, this coin, did you see the date on the coin? It's 1964. 64 is special. There's a reason why that's special. I'll tell you why exactly. You have a wallet on you, right?
I do.
Yeah? Did you have cash as well?
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I was checking for some cash right down here by your pocket. Down here, you had not a whole lot of stuff. This is interesting. It turned it up while we were looking at that coin. Not with a Sprint cell phone. That's the kind that you have, isn't it? I would use that to call if you're missing any cash and stuff like that. To be honest with you guys, after you have something like that happen, natural reaction, you're going to have a cigarette. Is that the kind that you smoke, man? That is the kind you smoke? Bring out your pack. Where's your cigarettes, man?
I don't know.
No?
Oh, right.
Right there?
Right here.
This would be the rest of them. They're all right here, man. Yeah, that's right. You keep the cigarettes. You want my light one goes up. Sorry about that.
Oh, you broke one.
Well, that's a lucky one. That's lucky. That's tradition. Thank you.
Okay. So Apollo Robbins is a Jedi Master, and these aren't the droids you're looking for, right? Now think about what you just saw. So he just did a number of stealing tricks, which he did not only in front of them, but he did them in front of you. And I can only assume you're not inebriated. So that's remarkable. Everything he stole on camera in front of you too. Okay? So what's happening here is he used all sorts of tricks. So he touched them. So that's something he was able to do to them and not you, to draw their attention to certain parts of their body while he did certain things. But he also did things like ask them questions that gave them an internal dialogue. And this is something that I think is ripe for the picking in neuroscience, that nobody has any idea how it works. But when you're paying attention to your own internal dialogue, you're paying attention to things that are not in your visual system, okay? So it's just like paying attention to the wrong part of your visual system, to the hand that doesn't have the coin, if you're paying attention to your inner dialogue, or you're laughing, or you're having other strong emotional reactions, you are actually putting your attention in a place where now a magician can commit magical murder, okay, and get away with it. And so that's what's been happening here. So, for example, one of the things he did was he turned the ring into a coin, okay? And then he gave the guy the coin, and he had him hold it out at arm's length, and he said, "What's the date on the coin?" Okay? Anybody remember the date? 1964, very good. And he was going to tell us the significance. And what was the significance of 1964? You're thinking, and those guys are thinking, like, is that the year Kennedy died? What happened in 1964? And it was at that moment that he stole the cigarettes, okay? So this was a highly choreographed action in which he was able to get all of them and all of you to not pay attention. Anybody see the cigarettes get stolen? A couple of people are saying yes, okay? So that's remarkable. That's remarkable. So anyway, we're going to leave it there, and we're happy to take questions. And we've written about this in our column in Scientific American, in a number of different articles you can find that are in scientific journals, and also we have a couple books that we write for this for lay people. But hope you understand now how you can speak at a level that anybody in 6th grade or even younger can understand, and come away feeling like they understand principles accurately about the brain, and that have an idea of where science, the edge of it is, what we know and we do not know, without actually having to lay on them the data. Okay, and that is something that we want to kind of encourage all of you to try to do, because I think that the more outreach there is to the public about what it is we're doing and why it's important, the better, and the better off we'll all be. Okay, well, thank you very much. Yeah, just come up.
Hello. Is it on?
Not yet. Hello. There's a. On the mic. This is on now? Okay. Yeah, so just come up to the mics and ask the question. He's going to turn it on in a second.
Hello. Thank you. That was really entertaining. I was wondering, for more classic illusions like the face and the vases, the faces and the vase, is there any categorical difference or like practice effect when it comes to seeing one versus the other, and people who can like seem to switch more easily between them versus people who have a really hard time seeing like the other half of the illusion?
I don't recall the complete literature on it, but there are some factors that affect perception of bistable illusions. So the face and the base, that would be one of the generally belong to the bistable illusion category, where you can see one or the other, but not both at once, and that. I believe there was a relatively recent study just a few years ago. I think that there was something. This was on the hollow mask illusion, and I think that was linked to schizophrenia. And I don't know if whether people with schizophrenia it was flipping more often or less often for them, and that there have been some also studies about. Expert meditators and that are like trained, like meditation masters, like monks and such, that seem to have a higher control over the rate of transitions than the rest of us. So I imagine that there can be some practice effects. I just don't know much more about it. I do know also that there have been some interesting eye tracking studies with the type of face illusion, where you can see it one way or another, and say when you're perceiving the vase, your exploratory eye movements, like your scan paths, will be drawing, so to speak, the contour of the vase, and when you're perceiving the faces, your eye movements will be exploring the faces accordingly.
Thanks.
Just to add to that, there are other bistable illusions that are not in the spatial domain, but they're in the color domain. So, for example, the dress illusion is a very famous one. Yeah. If you haven't seen that before, Google the dress illusion, and you'll see it. And in this illusion, what was interesting about it is roughly half the world saw it one way and half the world saw it the other, even when they're looking at the same image at the same time. And it's very hard to switch with that one. It's unusually hard. So I think that it makes it clear that bistable illusions aren't necessarily easy to switch from if you have a baseline. I don't know anybody who can switch easily in that one for some reason that no one understands.
Right, like some dimensions of the visual processing is it makes it harder to switch in the color domain compared to spatially. That's really interesting. Cool. Thank you so much. It was really fun.
Oh, all right. Hi, thanks. That was a really cool talk. I was wondering if you're aware of, or if you've come across any like super observers, people who like in those scene change videos, if they like always notice every change that happens. I'm thinking of like, I don't know if you're aware of the TV show Monk. It's like a detective who notices everything. Like I'm wondering if that's like, could be, if there are people out there who have that ability.
Now that's interesting. I do not know that there are such people that would have an easier time because, I mean, that's sort of related to the question. We often get asked, can you train yourself to multitask? Which is basically what this would require, to be basically paying attention to a number of different places at once. And so we're not wired for that because of these circuits of basically active suppression around the spotlight of attention. That means that you can train yourself to pay attention harder, to focus harder. And so, but the opposite is just, we just don't have that wiring. Now, a couple of issues with that. So, as Steve mentioned during the presentation, there is a task difficulty dependency. So basically, the harder the task, and the harder you are focusing, the worst you are going to be at detecting various things. And so what we have found, for instance, with the famous gorilla basketball illusion from Dan Simons, the instruction is to count the basketball passes. Now, the people who count the passes accurately are the ones that are least likely to see the gorilla. If people sort of ignore the tasks and they're looking around, then they're going to see the gorilla much more likely, but that's because they're not paying close attention to what they're supposed to begin with. And so I do think that this is not something that we can train ourselves to do, or that there are observers that, perhaps, say that people with ADHD, right, that if they're not really focusing attention, they may be more likely to notice things around, but that's because they're not focusing to begin with. It's kind of similar with children. Like with children, it's interesting because magic is often thought of as a type of entertainment for young children. But magicians, unless they're specialized in magic for children, they don't like to work with children, and that is because they cannot really control their attentional spotlight. And the threshold seems to be about the age of 6. So probably if we had a young child, that they're not really trying to focus very much or they're distracted, they might notice more things than the rest of us. But I think that that's not being a super observer. It's kind of like the opposite in some ways. I mean, I think that our superpower is really the ability to focus our attention. And for what it's worth, there was a study showing that the people who think that they can multitask the best are actually the worst at it. So, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Hello. Thank you for a wonderful talk, and I'm trying not to bang way too hard here because I read that book, Sleight of Mind, and I thought that was excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you, I know that vision is right now one of the more prominent researches in vision is computer vision, and I was wondering if you guys know any research or have done any research on showing computer vision visual illusions, and if there were any interesting results from that, or if that's something that you haven't done yet.
There have been some studies where people have used AI to try and look at visual illusions. I'm not aware of anything that jumped out as being super interesting so far, except that it's being attempted.
Well, in terms of, it's not exactly computer vision, but Sugihara's first.
Oh yeah, I mean, you saw Sugihara's illusions with the ramps and the squircles, right? The things that when you rotate them, they look different in there. So he is actually a computer scientist, and he discovered this approach because he was building software to read blueprints, and then from the blueprints, the software is supposed to build the building, okay? And what he found was because blueprints are impoverished views of the building, that his software would sometimes build fantastically erroneous buildings, right? Because it didn't have the assumptions that a human architect would have. And then he found this really interesting, that these were actually, at first he thought that his software was just wrong, but he realized the software was correct, but it just was missing certain assumptions that humans would make about convexity versus concavity, which can look the same even though they're the opposite, and things like that. And then he realized he could really take this a long ways, and he became interested in the illusory aspects of it. So I think right now, nobody is using, for example, illusions to test AI and AI abilities, or to see if AIs are like humans. But one could do that, right? I think logically that's somewhere it could go.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks again for a wonderful talk. My question relates peripherally to some of the topics that have been raised, but I was wondering about neuroatypical people, and I'm thinking of people whose eye movement patterns in social interactions are not the same as average. Does that lead to a mismatch of expectation? Are they immune to some kinds of magic?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So we actually have speculated about that. We haven't actually tested neurodivergent populations with magic tricks, but you might expect that I believe that it would depend on the trick itself. Okay, so as Steve pointed out during his presentation, magicians may use their body language, their own gaze position, and so forth. Like magicians have these axioms that if like a magician on stage, if they want the audience to look at them, they will look directly at the audience, and the audience will reciprocate. If the magician wants the audience to look at a particular object, then the magician will very intently look at that object. And because of the mechanisms of joint attention, then the audience will do the same. Now, if there were some magic tricks that rely very heavily on joint attention and social cues, we might expect some neurodivergent people to respond less well to them, perhaps autistic people or people with ADHD. Having said that, a number of magic tricks, like we have seen Apollo Robbins perform the French drop, that will work just showing the hands of the magician without even seeing his face. And we have done a number of experiments in our laboratories in which we have experiments with magic tricks that were thought to rely at least partially on social cues, but we found that just covering the face of the magician, occluding it in the video, worked just as well in terms of misdirection.
Thank you.
So I'm sorry. I think I'm going to have to cut it off there. But Steve and Susanna are going to be here for the 2 days of the event, or most of the 2 days?
At least through lunch tomorrow.
Okay, at least through lunch tomorrow. So please find them, ask them questions, talk to them. They're a fountain of knowledge. Please join me in thanking them for what was a really interesting talk.